Single dad security guard stopped a thief, but when he saw her face, he dropped to his knees. Because the criminal he caught in the dark wasn't a stranger at all, but the last person he ever expected to see again, and the secret she carried was about to tear his whole world open. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Griffin's hands trembled as he stared into the familiar brown eyes of his daughter. Eyes that mirrored his own, now filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Mariah Rivera, no longer the toddler he remembered, but a grown woman of 22, struggled against his grip before recognition flickered across her face. "Let go of me!" she hissed, trying to wrench free. Her voice cracked with desperation. Griffin loosened his hold but didn't release her completely. His heart hammered against his ribs as memories flooded back. Of a tiny girl with pigtails dancing in their old kitchen. Of goodbye. Kisses that became permanent farewells. "Mariah," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She stopped fighting and glared at him, her jaw clenched tight. "Just call the cops," she spat. "Get it over with." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Griffin noticed details he'd missed in the initial shock. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her coat hung loose on her thin frame, the tremor in her hands as she clutched the backpack stuffed with stolen goods. "I'm not calling anyone," he said quietly, forcing his security guard training aside as his father's heart took over. "But we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about." Mariah's eyes darted toward the exit. "You made that clear 18 years ago." A night stalker walked past with a cart of boxes, giving them a curious look. Griffin guided Mariah toward his small office near the front of the store, grateful for the privacy it would offer. She resisted at first, but followed, her shoulders tight with tension. Inside, the cramped space, with its desk cluttered with security monitors, Griffin closed the door. The silence between them felt as vast as the years that separated them. He noticed Mariah eyeing the phone on his desk. "I meant what I said, no police," he assured her. "But I need to understand, are you in trouble?" Mariah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When am I not in trouble? But this isn't about me." She hugged the backpack closer. "I can't afford these things, and my baby needs them." The word baby hit Griffin like a physical blow. "You have a child?" "A daughter." Mariah's voice softened slightly. "Hope. She's 6 months old." Griffin sank into his desk chair, his legs suddenly weak. "I'm a grandfather," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then another thought struck him. "Does the baby's father help?" "There is no father," Mariah said sharply. "Not in the picture, just like some other fathers I know." The accusation stung, but Griffin knew he deserved it. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "Terrible ones, your mother and I." "Don't," Mariah cut him off. "Don't talk about Mama. She did her best after you left us. Working 2 jobs, barely sleeping." Her voice caught. "At least she stayed." Griffin rubbed his face with his weathered hands. "You're right. I failed you both. But please, let me help now. With the baby supplies, I don't need your charity," Mariah snapped, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. "It's not charity. It's—" Griffin paused, searching for the right words. "It's what a father should do. What I should have done all along." Something in his tone made Mariah really look at him for the first time. She took in his security guard uniform, the tired lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. "You look old," she said, almost accusingly. A small smile tugged at Griffin's mouth. "I am old, and I'm also a father again." At her confused look, he added, "You have a brother, Sammy. He's 10. Mariah's eyes widened. "You started another family?" "No, not exactly." Griffin's voice grew heavy with grief. "His mother, my wife Sarah, passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. It's just been Sammy and me since then." The revelation seemed to throw Mariah off balance. She sank into the other chair, still clutching her backpack. Is he like me?" Griffin understood the real question she was asking. "He's his own person. He has autism, which makes some things challenging for him, but he's the sweetest boy you'll ever meet." Pride crept into his voice. "He loves patterns and numbers, and he remembers everything he reads. He's so smart, Mariah." A complex emotion crossed Mariah's face. Curiosity mingled with something like longing, but she quickly masked it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're his sister," Griffin said simply, "and because I want you to know that I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped loving you, even though I know I have no right to say that anymore." Tears welled in Mariah's eyes, but she blinked them back angrily. Love, you don't even know me. I'm not that little girl anymore. She gestured at the backpack full of stolen goods. I'm this. Griffin leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You're a mother trying to take care of her baby. I see that. Let me help. Not with charity, but with a job. The store needs cashiers, and I can put in a good word with the manager. You get employee benefits, a discount on baby supplies. Why would you do that? Mariah's voice was barely above a whisper. After everything? Because I can't change the past, Griffin said, his own eyes growing moist. But maybe I can help make the future a little better. For you and for Hope. He reached for his wallet and pulled out some bills. Take this for tonight's supplies, please. As a grandfather, not a security guard. Mariah stared at the money, conflict clear on her face. Finally, she reached out and took it, her fingers brushing against his for the first time in 18 years. The touch sent a jolt through Griffin's heart. This doesn't fix anything, she warned, but her voice had lost some of its earlier hostility. I know, Griffin agreed. But maybe it's a start? Mariah stood, adjusting the backpack on her shoulder. I'll think about the job, she said carefully, but no promises. Griffin nodded, not wanting to push too hard. He wrote his phone number on a scrap of paper and held it out to her. For whenever you're ready, day or night. She took the paper, folding it precisely before slipping it into her pocket. At the door, she paused. This brother, Sammy, what's his favorite color? The unexpected question made Griffin smile. Blue. Dark blue, like the night sky. Mariah nodded once, as if filing away this information. Without another word, she slipped out of the office and disappeared into the night, leaving Griffin alone with his thundering heart and the first fragile thread of hope he'd felt in 18 years. Let go of me, Mariah hissed, trying to wrench her arm free from Griffin's grip. Her face twisted with anger as recognition dawned in her eyes. You've got to be kidding me. Griffin stood frozen, his mouth dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. The security guard uniform felt too tight around his neck. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his daughter's face, a face he hadn't seen in 18 years except in old photographs and dreams. Mariah, he managed to whisper, his voice rough with emotion. She spat at his feet, making him flinch. Don't you dare say my name. You lost that right a long time ago. The backpack she'd been filling was still clutched in her other hand, formula and diapers visible through the half-zipped opening. Griffin's training told him to call the police, to follow protocol, but his heart, his father's heart, wouldn't let him. Please, he said softly, loosening his grip but not letting go, completely. Just come with me for a minute. Why should I? Mariah's voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion behind her fierce exterior. So you can lecture me? Call the cops? Play daddy after all these years? Griffin shook his head, fighting to keep his composure. The security office. Just for a few minutes. Please. Something in his tone must have reached her because she stopped struggling, though her eyes remained hard and suspicious. 5 minutes. That's all you get. Griffin led her through the empty aisles of the store, past the checkout counters where the night cashier pretended not to watch them. The security office was small and warm, with monitors showing grainy footage of the store's various sections. A mini fridge hummed in the corner. Sit, Griffin said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs. When Mariah remained standing, arms crossed, he didn't push it. Instead, he opened the mini fridge and pulled out his dinner, a sandwich and an apple he'd packed for his break. Here, he said, holding them out to her. You must be hungry. I don't need your charity, Mariah snapped, but her eyes lingered on the food. It's not charity, it's... Griffin's voice trailed off. What could he say? That it was fatherly concern? He'd lost that right years ago, just as she'd said. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and years of absence. Griffin noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame, the defensive set of her shoulders. His heart ached. The formula, he said finally. And the diapers. You have a baby? Mariah's face hardened even more. That's none of your business. I could help. Help? Mariah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like you helped when Mom was struggling to put food on the table? Like you helped when she got sick and couldn't work? Like you helped when I needed my father? Each question hit Griffin like a physical blow. He sank into the empty chair, his legs suddenly weak. "I know I failed you," he said quietly. "Both of you. Save it." Mariah cut him off. "I didn't come here for your guilt trip or your redemption story. I came here because my daughter needs formula, and I can't." She stopped abruptly, biting her lip. Griffin's chest tightened at the mention of a granddaughter he didn't know existed. He reached for his wallet with trembling hands. "Let me help, please, just this once." "Keep your money," Mariah said, but her voice wavered. "I don't want anything from you." Griffin pulled out several 20s anyway, laying them on the desk between them. "Take it," he said. "Not for me. For her." Mariah stared at the money, her jaw clenched. A tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it away angrily. "You think this makes up for anything?" "No," Griffin said honestly. "Nothing could make up for what I did. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is making sure my He caught himself. "Making sure your daughter has what she needs." For a long moment, Mariah didn't move. Then, quick as a striking snake, she snatched the money from the desk. "This changes nothing," she said, her voice cold. "Stay out of my life. Stay away from me and my daughter. We've managed just fine without you for 18 years, and we'll keep managing." She turned toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Without looking back, she said, "If you try to find us, if you try to contact us, I'll disappear so fast you'll think you imagined seeing me tonight." Before Griffin could respond, she was gone, her footsteps echoing through the empty store. He watched on the security monitors as she pushed through the automatic doors and out into the snowy night, her dark figure quickly swallowed by the swirling flakes. Griffin's legs carried him automatically to his car in the parking lot. He sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, just staring through the windshield as snow accumulated on the glass. His daughter's face haunted him. No longer the smiling toddler from his memories, but a hardened young woman with his eyes and her mother's fierce spirit. The hours crawled by. 2 o'clock, 3, 4. Griffin sat motionless, barely breathing, as memories washed over him. Mariah's first steps, her infectious laugh, the way she used to call him daddy with such pure love and trust. The day he walked away, convinced he was too broken to be the father she deserved. The years of silence that followed, filled with regret and shame. At 5:30, the morning crew began arriving, their headlights sweeping across his snow-covered car. At 6, his shift officially ended, but Griffin felt like something else had ended too. Something he hadn't even known he was holding on to until tonight. Hope, maybe. Or the comforting lie that his daughter might still need him someday. He sat there as the weak winter sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray, thinking about the granddaughter he would never know and the redemption he would never find. The key to Griffin's apartment turned with a familiar squeak. His shoulders sagged as he stepped inside, the weight of the night's encounter still pressing down on him. The living room lamp cast a warm glow across their small apartment, and there at the coffee table sat Sammy, surrounded by colored pencils and sheets of paper. "You're drawing already, buddy?" Griffin's voice came out rougher than he intended. It was barely 6:30 inches the morning. Sammy didn't look up, his hand moving in careful strokes across the paper. "T-Rex needs green spots," he said softly, reaching for another pencil. "Did you know they might have had feathers?" Griffin shed his security guard jacket and hung it by the door. The fabric still held the chill from the store's loading dock, where he'd watched Mariah disappear into the darkness. He moved closer to examine Sammy's artwork, forcing his face into what he hoped was a neutral expression. But Sammy's head snapped. Up, his eyes scanning Griffin's face with that uncanny perception that often caught Griffin off guard. "You're sad," Sammy stated simply, setting down his pencil. Something bad happened. Griffin ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "Just a stressful night at work, that's all." The lie felt bitter on his tongue. He'd never been good at deceiving anyone, least of all his perceptive son. "Your eyes look different," Sammy persisted, his own gaze unwavering. "Like when we visit Mom." Griffin's throat tightened. He sat heavily on the worn couch beside the coffee table. "Sometimes grown-ups just have hard days, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about." He gestured to the dinosaur drawing. "Tell me more about those feathers." Sammy studied him for another long moment before returning to his artwork. Scientists found fossils with feather impressions. They think some were colorful, like birds. His voice took on the steady rhythm it always did when sharing facts about his favorite subject. Griffin listened, letting the familiar sound of Sammy's dinosaur knowledge wash over him as he tried to steady his racing thoughts. The morning routine helped ground him, making breakfast, checking Sammy's backpack, walking him to the bus stop. Sammy ate his toast in precise triangular bites, while Griffin pretended to read the newspaper, though the words blurred before his eyes. "Bus is coming," Sammy announced, right on schedule. He could tell time better than any clock Griffin owned. Griffin helped Sammy into his coat and walked him outside. The morning air was sharp with winter, the sky still dark at the edges. He watched as Sammy climbed aboard, taking his usual seat behind the driver. The bus pulled away, leaving Griffin alone with his thoughts. Back in the kitchen, he pulled out an old shoebox from the highest cabinet. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photo he hadn't looked at in years. Maria Rivera's smile beamed up at him, her arms wrapped around a 4-year-old Mariah. The photo was creased down the middle from being folded, but the joy in their faces remained clear. That was before everything fell apart, before his PTSD from his Marine days had turned him angry and distant, before Maria had taken Mariah and left, before he'd lost all contact with his daughter. Griffin's hands shook as he set the photo on the kitchen table. He pulled out his laptop, the one he usually used only for paying bills and occasionally helping Sammy with homeschool work. The search bar blinked at him accusingly as he typed in "Women's Shelters, Cleveland area." Pages of results populated his screen. He started making notes, writing down addresses and phone numbers. His police contacts from work were years out of date, but he still had a few numbers for veteran outreach programs. He dialed the first one with unsteady fingers. "Hey, Jim? It's Griffin Lee." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I'm trying to locate someone." For the next 2 hours, Griffin made calls and searched social media. Mariah Rivera was a ghost. No Facebook profile he could find, no Instagram, nothing. A few old addresses led nowhere. The shelters couldn't give out information about residents, even if they wanted to help. He stared at the photo again, at the little girl with ribbons in her hair who had grown into the angry young woman he'd encountered last night. The baby formula and diapers she'd tried to steal weighed heavily on his mind. Was she a mother now? The thought of having a grandchild out there somewhere, possibly hungry and in need, made his chest ache. The morning light grew stronger, casting shadows across the kitchen table where Griffin sat, surrounded by notes and dead ends. He'd have to sleep soon before his next shift, but rest felt impossible. His daughter was out there somewhere in the city, struggling, and for the first time in 18 years, he had a chance to make things right, if she would let him. The photo of Maria seemed to watch him with judgment in her frozen smile. "I know," he whispered to it. "I know I failed you both, but I have to try to fix this." He picked up his phone one more time, dialing another number from his list. Someone had to know something. Someone had to be able to help him find her. The alternative, losing her again, wasn't something he could bear to consider. The December wind cut through Griffin's uniform as he made his nightly rounds outside the store. His flashlight beam swept across the loading dock, illuminating patches of dirty snow and forgotten pallets. 3 nights had passed since his encounter with Mariah, and every shadow made his heart jump. The service entrance light flickered, casting uneven light near the dumpsters. Griffin almost missed it. A slight movement, followed by what sounded like a baby's whimper. He swung his flashlight toward the sound. There, huddled against the dumpster, was Mariah. She had a small bundle pressed against her chest, wrapped in what looked like old towels. His daughter was trying to feed a baby in the freezing cold. "Dear God," Griffin whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air. His feet were moving before his mind could catch up. Mariah's head snapped up at his approach. Her eyes went wide with panic, and she scrambled to her feet, clutching the bundle closer. "Stay back! Wait!" Griffin held up his hands, letting the flashlight point downward. "Please, just wait." She tried to run, but after 2 steps, her legs wobbled. Griffin caught her elbow as she stumbled, careful not to jostle the baby. The bundle let out another weak cry. "Let me help," Griffin said softly, the way he often spoke to Sammy when his son was overwhelmed. "Please, it's freezing out here." Mariah's face was pale, dark circles under her eyes. She looked ready to collapse. "I don't need your help," she said, but her voice cracked. "That baby needs to be warm." Griffin gestured toward the store's back entrance. "At least come inside. For a few minutes. There's a break room with heat." Mariah glanced down at her baby, then at the dark alley behind her. Another icy gust of wind made her shiver violently. Finally, she gave a small nod. Griffin led them through the employee entrance, past the storage room, and into the small break room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he turned up the ancient wall heater. Mariah sank into a chair, adjusting the towels around her baby. Now in the light, Griffin could see his grandchild's face. Tiny features, pink from the cold, with a dusting of dark hair. His throat tightened. "How old?" he managed to ask. 6 months. Mariah's voice was barely audible. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Her name is Hope." Griffin grabbed his lunch bag from his locker and pulled out an unopened bottle of water and a sandwich. He placed them on the table in front of Mariah. "When did you last eat?" She stared at the food for a long moment before picking up the sandwich with one hand, the other still cradling Hope. She took a small bite, then another, larger one. "You can't stay on the streets," Griffin said carefully. "Not with a baby. Not in this weather. We manage." But her voice wavered. "Come home with me." The words came out before he could second-guess them. "I have space, a warm bed, real food." Mariah's jaw tightened. "I'm not some charity case. You're my daughter," Griffin said. "And that's my granddaughter. Please." Hope began to fuss, her little face scrunching up. Mariah tried to adjust her position, but exhaustion made her movements clumsy. The baby's cries grew louder. "Let me help," Griffin said again, taking a step closer. "Just for tonight. You both need rest." Mariah looked down at Hope, then at the dark window where snow had started falling again. Her shoulders slumped. "One night," she whispered. "That's it." Griffin nodded, afraid to say more. He gathered his things quickly, called his supervisor to take an emergency family leave, and led them out, to his car in the employee lot. The back seat held Sammy's booster seat on one side. Griffin watched as Mariah settled into the other side, holding Hope close. The baby had quieted, bundled now in Griffin's spare winter coat along with the towels. As he closed the car door, Griffin's hand trembled. His granddaughter, a baby named Hope, both of them had been sleeping near a dumpster while he'd been warm in his apartment. He took a deep breath of the cold night air, then got into the driver's seat, sending up a silent prayer of thanks that he'd found them in time. The key clicked in the lock as Griffin shouldered open the door to his modest 2-bedroom apartment, careful not to make too much noise. Mariah stood behind him, clutching baby Hope tightly to her chest, her eyes darting around the dimly lit living room as if searching for escape routes. "It's not much," Griffin said softly, flicking on a lamp that cast a warm glow over the worn furniture. A small Christmas tree sat in the reboard corner, decorated with handmade ornaments, clearly Sammy's work. "But it's warm and safe." Mariah didn't respond. She just held Hope closer, swaying slightly as the baby stirred in her sleep. Her backpack hung heavy on her shoulder, probably containing the stolen items from the store. "You can take my room," Griffin offered, gesturing down the short hallway. "I'll sleep on the couch." "I'm fine here," Mariah muttered, sinking into the weathered armchair by the window. Her shoulders remained tense, but exhaustion was written across her face. A soft creak drew their attention. Down the hallway, a small figure appeared, Sammy in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching his worn velociraptor plush. His eyes widened at the sight of the strangers in his living room. "Hey, buddy," Griffin whispered, crossing to his son. "Did we wake you?" Sammy shook his head, his gaze fixed on the bundle in Mariah's arms. He took a few cautious steps forward, stopping just short of the armchair. Hope chose that moment to wake, making tiny whimpering sounds that seemed to fill the quiet apartment. Mariah instinctively turned away, but Sammy didn't move. Instead, he held out his stuffed dinosaur toward the baby. "She might like Rex," he said in his soft, careful voice. "He keeps the bad dreams away." Something flickered across Mariah's face. Surprise, confusion, then the smallest hint of a smile. It transformed her entire expression, making her look younger, more like the little girl Griffin remembered. She adjusted Hope in her arms so the baby could see Sammy and his offering. That's very nice of you," Mariah said, her voice catching slightly. "Would you like to see her?" Sammy nodded, taking another step closer. Hope's tiny hand reached out, grabbing at the dinosaur's tail. A delighted giggle escaped her, making Sammy beam. Griffin watched the scene unfold, his heart tight in his chest. He cleared his throat. "How about some breakfast? You both must be hungry." In the kitchen, Griffin moved on autopilot, pulling out eggs, bread, and bacon from the fridge. The familiar routine of cooking helped steady his shaking hands. Behind him, he could hear Sammy's quiet voice as he introduced Hope to each of his favorite dinosaurs, which he'd apparently run to retrieve from his room. This is Trike, he's a Triceratops. And this is Blue. Sammy's gentle narration continued as Griffin worked at the stove. The smell of food slowly filled the apartment. Griffin made enough for an army, eggs scrambled just the way Sammy liked them, crispy bacon, toast with butter, and a pot of strong coffee. He'd learned from raising Sammy that routine and familiar comforts helped in uncertain situations. When he turned around with loaded plates, he found Mariah had moved to the couch. Hope lay in her lap, happily grasping Sammy's velociraptor, while Sammy sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging his dinosaur collection for her entertainment. "Here," Griffin said, setting a plate on the coffee table in front of Mariah. "Eat while it's hot." She stared at the food for a long moment before picking up the fork. The first bite seemed to break something loose in her, and she began eating quickly, as if afraid it might disappear. Griffin noticed how thin she was, how her clothes hung loose on her frame. Sammy tugged at Griffin's sleeve as he distributed the rest of the plates. "Daddy," he whispered, though his whisper was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is that my sister?" The fork in Mariah's hand stilled. Griffin felt the weight of both their gazes on him, Sammy's innocent curiosity and Mariah's guarded wariness. The truth sat heavy in his throat, too complex to explain, too important to ignore. "Yes, buddy," Griffin finally answered, his voice rough. "That's your sister Mariah, and that's your niece, Hope." Sammy considered this new information with his usual thoughtful expression. "Oh," he said simply. Then, turning to Mariah, "Do you like dinosaurs?" A strange sound escaped Mariah, something between a laugh and a sob. I used to," she admitted. "When I was little, the morning light grew stronger outside, filtering through the worn curtains. They ate in relative silence, broken only by Hope's occasional coos and Sammy's quiet explanations about his dinosaur collection." Griffin watched as some of the tension gradually eased from Mariah's shoulders. After breakfast, when Sammy had returned to his room to get dressed for school, Mariah stood awkwardly in the living room, Hope drowsy against her shoulder. "I can't," she started, then stopped. "We shouldn't." "Stay," Griffin said quietly, "just for a couple nights. Until you figure things out," he gestured to the baby. "It's too cold out there for Hope." Mariah's jaw clenched, but her eyes darted to the window where snow had started falling again. Finally, she gave a short nod. "A couple nights," she agreed. "That's it." Griffin watched as she settled back into the armchair, Hope snuggled against her chest. His daughter was here, under his roof, with a baby of her own. The reality of it seemed impossible, yet there they were. He had 1,000 questions, a lifetime of regrets, but for now, this would have to be enough. His broken family, together under one roof, if only for a couple of nights. The microwave hummed as Griffin heated up leftover lasagna, stealing glances at Mariah, who sat rigidly at the small kitchen table. Hope dozed peacefully in her arms, wrapped in one of Sammy's old baby blankets they'd found in storage. Sammy had already gone to bed, though Griffin suspected he was still awake, listening. "There's formula in that grocery bag," Griffin said, keeping his voice low. "And some diapers." Mariah didn't respond, just held Hope closer. The microwave beeped, and Griffin set a steaming plate in front of her. He grabbed his own serving and sat across the table, the distance between them feeling like miles. "You should eat while." "It's hot," he suggested, pushing a fork toward her. Mariah adjusted Hope to one arm and picked up the fork with her free hand. She took a small bite, then another, hunger overtaking her hesitation. They ate in tense silence until she suddenly dropped her fork with a clatter. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, though still keeping her voice down for the baby's sake. "Playing dad now after all these years?" Griffin set down his own fork, his appetite vanishing. "Mariah, save it," she cut him off. "You walked out on us. On Mom. On me. I was 4 years old, Dad. 4. Her voice cracked on the last word. Griffin's hands clenched under the table. "It wasn't that simple." "Really?" "Because it seemed pretty simple from where I was standing. You just disappeared." Mariah's dark eyes burned with 18 years of pain. "Mom worked 3 jobs. We barely survived. And you were what? Too scared? Too weak?" "I was messed up," Griffin admitted, his shoulders sagging. "The things I saw overseas, they changed me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every car backfire, every loud noise." He shook his head. I thought I was protecting you both by leaving. Protecting us? Mariah's laugh was bitter. From what? From me. Griffin's voice was rough. From what I'd become. And your mother's family? They never accepted me. Called me names. Said I wasn't good enough for her. After what happened at that family gathering, the fight with Tio Miguel, Mariah's eyes narrowed. Mom told me about that. Griffin nodded slowly. The slurs they used. He swallowed hard. The PTSD, it was bad. I lost control. Nearly hurt him. That's when I knew I had to go. So you ran. The contempt in her voice made him flinch. Left Mom to deal with their racism alone. Left me without a father. I was wrong, Griffin said quietly. So wrong. Not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Mariah stood abruptly, careful not to jostle Hope. I need some air. She headed for the small balcony off the living room. Griffin waited a moment, then followed. The December air bit through their clothes as Mariah stood at the railing, Hope bundled against her chest. The city lights sparkled below, a poor replacement for stars. I wrote letters, Griffin said, staying by the door. Hundreds of them, never sent them. Too ashamed. Shame? Mariah's shoulders tensed. You want to talk about shame? Try being the kid whose dad abandoned her. Try explaining that to your friends, your teachers. Try watching your mom cry herself to sleep. Griffin took a step closer. I failed you both. I know that. The PTSD, the racism, they were reasons, not excuses. I should have fought harder, should have gotten help, should have stayed. But you didn't. Mariah's voice wavered. No, Griffin agreed softly. I didn't, and I've hated myself for it every day since. The night air filled with their uneven breathing and distant traffic sounds. Hope stirred slightly, making Simply sighed, tiny snuffling noises in her sleep. I don't expect your forgiveness, Griffin said. I haven't earned it. But seeing you tonight, knowing you and Hope needed help. He paused, struggling to find the right words. I can't change the past, but I'm here now, if you'll let me be. Mariah didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. They stood in heavy silence until Hope began to fuss. It's getting cold, Griffin said. You should both get some rest. Sammy's room has a spare bed. He's been asking for a sibling to share with for years. He attempted a small smile that Mariah didn't see. Back inside, Griffin showed them to Sammy's room. His son pretended to be asleep, but Griffin noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. Mariah settled onto the spare bed with Hope, turning her back to the door. Later that night, Griffin stood in the doorway, watching over his daughter and granddaughter's sleeping forms. Sammy's nightlight cast soft dinosaur shapes on the walls, and Hope's quiet breathing mixed with Mariah's deeper rhythms. His chest ached with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. Standing there in the gentle darkness, Griffin made a silent promise to whatever power might be listening. He would not fail them again. No matter what it took, no matter how long it took, he would not let his daughter slip away a second time. Morning light filtered through the apartment's thin curtains as Griffin packed Sammy's lunch for his homeschool group. The sound of running water from the bathroom caught his attention. Mariah had been in there for nearly 20 minutes. He wouldn't have thought much of it, but then he heard her voice, hushed and anxious. I told you, I'm done. I can't. No. Listen to me. Her words were barely audible through the door. Griffin set down the sandwich he was making and moved closer to the bathroom, his security training kicking in. Years of watching for subtle signs of trouble had honed his instincts. You don't understand. I have a baby now. Mariah's voice cracked. I don't care what Joey says. Find someone else. Griffin's heart pounded. He stepped back from the door and busied himself in the kitchen as the bathroom door opened. Mariah emerged, her face pale and drawn. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Everything okay? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Fine, she mumbled, hurrying to check on Hope, who was napping in Sammy's room. Later that afternoon, while Mariah was feeding Hope, Griffin noticed her backpack had fallen over near the couch. A small black burner phone had slipped out. His stomach clenched. He'd seen enough of these disposable phones during his security work to know what they meant. People who didn't want to be traced. He picked up the phone, walked to Sammy's room, and held it up. We need to talk. Mariah's face went white. She clutched Hope closer to her chest. That's private. Who were you talking to this morning? Griffin's voice was steady but firm. And, don't tell me it was no one. Tears welled in Mariah's eyes. She looked down at Hope, who was contentedly drinking her formula. I got mixed up with some people. Before Hope. She swallowed hard. They had me running jobs. Small stuff at first. Stealing from stores, being a lookout. Griffin sat down heavily on Sammy's desk chair. Go on. After I got pregnant, they said I could still be useful. Said I'd look less suspicious. Her voice shook. But the jobs got bigger, more dangerous. When Hope was born, I knew I had to get out. They wanted me to carry drugs with her in the car. She wiped her eyes. I refused. Disappeared. But they found me. They always find me. Griffin's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. He wanted to shout, to demand how she could have gotten involved with such people. But one look at her face, young, scared, trying so hard to protect her baby, stopped him. He'd failed her once by walking away. He wouldn't fail her again. These people, he said carefully. They're still looking for you? Mariah nodded. Joey, their leader, he doesn't like losing useful people. Says I owe him. Griffin stood up and pulled out his cell phone. I'm calling Pastor Reyna. No, Mariah started to rise, but Hope's small protest made her settle back down. No police, no churches. They'll just make everything worse. Pastor Reyna isn't just a pastor, Griffin explained, already dialing. She runs a protection program for people trying to get out of dangerous situations. She has connections with legitimate organizations that can help. He paused. And she knows how to be discreet. While Mariah fed Hope, Griffin spoke quietly with Pastor Reyna in the living room. Within an hour, she had helped arrange for additional security measures and started the process of getting Mariah into a program that would help her build a new life, legally and safely. That evening, Griffin moved the last of Sammy's toys into the living room. This is your room now, he told Mariah and Hope. Sammy's happy to take the couch. He says it's like camping. Mariah looked around the small bedroom, now rearranged to accommodate her and Hope's needs. Dad, She stopped, seeming surprised by her own use of the word. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Griffin checked the new locks he'd installed on the windows. You're my daughter. Hope's my granddaughter. And I'm not losing either of you again. Later that night, a sharp noise outside the apartment made Griffin's eyes snap open. Years of military and security work had left him with light sleeping habits. He slipped out of bed, moving silently to his closet, where he kept his legally registered shotgun. The sound came again, like someone testing the back door's handle. Griffin positioned himself near his front door, shotgun ready, and listened intently to the darkness. Behind him, Sammy's soft breathing from the couch was steady and peaceful. Down the hall, he could hear Hope's tiny sighs through the baby monitor. He stood guard, a father protecting his family, ready to face whatever threat might come. The old church stood like a weathered guardian on the corner of Mason and 3rd, its red brick facade darkened by decades of city grime. Griffin sat in his car, hands tight on the steering wheel, staring at the Iglesia Nueva Esperanza, New Hope Church sign. He hadn't been here since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. The side door opened, and Pastor Reyna Morales stepped out to water the small garden she maintained along the church wall. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and even from a distance, Griffin could see the same gentle determination in her movements that had helped him through Sarah's cancer battle. Taking a deep breath, Griffin got out of his car. The December wind bit through his jacket as he approached. Griffin Lee, Reyna said, setting down her watering can. Her warm brown eyes crinkled with concern. It's been too long, hermano. Pastor Reyna. Griffin's voice came out rough. I need your help. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Come inside where it's warm. I'll make some coffee. The pastor's office was small but welcoming, with well-worn armchairs and walls lined with books in English and Spanish. Family photos showed a younger Reyna with her late husband Miguel and their grown children. Griffin sat heavily in one of the chairs while Reyna prepared 2 cups of coffee. How's Sammy doing? She asked, handing him a steaming mug. Griffin paused, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. That's part of why I'm here. My daughter Mariah showed up. Reyna's eyebrows rose, but she remained silent, letting him continue. She was stealing formula from the store where I work. She has a baby, my granddaughter. Griffin's voice cracked. They were living on the streets. I brought them home, but there's more. She was mixed up with some gang, running theft jobs for them. Now they're looking for her. Dios mío, Reyna murmured. She leaned forward, her expression concerned but not judgmental. Are they safe now? They're staying with me and Sammy, but Griffin ran a hand over his face. I don't know what I'm doing, Raina. I failed her once already. I can't fail her again. You're not alone in this, Griffin. Raina's voice was firm. The church has resources. We can help with baby supplies, and I know several families who run a safe house network for people escaping dangerous situations. She's so angry with me, Griffin admitted. 20 years of hurt. I don't blame her. Healing takes time, Raina said softly, and patience, both with her and yourself. She pulled out a notepad and began writing. First, let's address the immediate needs. How old is the baby? Hope. She's about 6 months. Raina nodded, still writing. I'll put together some supplies. Diapers, formula, clothes. We have a wonderful donation program. She looked up at Find. Griffin. Would Mariah consider coming to service? Griffin gave a hollow laugh. I doubt it. She hasn't exactly shown interest in anything spiritual. Just extend the invitation. No pressure. Raina paused, then added gently. And what about you, Griffin? We've missed you here. He stared into his coffee. After Sarah, it was too hard. I understand. Raina's voice held echoes of her own loss. But sometimes the hardest steps are the ones we most need to take. They spent the next hour working out practical details. Raina connected Griffin with 2 security companies that needed extra holiday help, and he immediately arranged to pick up evening shifts that wouldn't conflict with his regular night work. Every extra dollar would help with the mounting expenses of caring for an infant. When Griffin returned home that afternoon, his arms full of supplies from the church, he found Mariah sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with Hope, who was attempting to crawl toward Sammy's dinosaur collection. The church had some things for the baby, Griffin said carefully, setting down the bags. Mariah's face tightened. We don't need charity. It's not charity, it's community. Griffin started unpacking the supplies. Pastor Raina asked if you'd like to come to service sometime. No pressure, they're bilingual services. A church? Mariah scoffed, but her eyes lingered on the fresh diapers and warm baby clothes. That's your solution? No, Griffin said quietly, but it's a start. They have resources that could help, people who understand complicated situations. Mariah picked up one of the tiny sweaters, running her fingers over the soft fabric. Hope gurgled and finally managed to grab one of Sammy's smaller plastic dinosaurs. One service, Mariah said finally, not looking at him. Just one. And only because we need the help. Griffin nodded, careful to keep his face neutral despite the surge of hope in his chest. That's all I'm asking. The following. Sunday, they filed into a back pew, Griffin, Mariah holding Hope, and Sammy clutching his comfort dinosaur. Pastor Raina spoke from the pulpit, alternating seamlessly between Spanish and English, her words about grace and second chances washing over them like gentle rain. Mariah sat stiffly through the service, barely acknowledging Raina's warm welcome afterward. But when the pastor produced a hand-knitted baby blanket for Hope, Griffin saw his daughter's shoulders relax slightly. The ladies in our prayer group made it, Raina explained, her smile genuine as Hope grabbed at the colorful yarn. Thank you, Mariah mumbled, and though her tone was cool, she carefully wrapped Hope in the blanket for the ride home. That evening, after putting Sammy to bed, Griffin prepared for his first side job, security at a shopping center's extended holiday hours. His body already ached from his regular shift the night before, but the extra income would be worth it. You don't have to work yourself to death, Mariah said from the kitchen doorway, watching him check his security belt. I want to, Griffin replied simply. You and Hope need things. Good formula isn't cheap, and neither are diapers. Something flickered across Mariah's face. Pain, guilt, or maybe both. She disappeared into Sammy's room without another word. But when Griffin headed for the door, he found a sandwich wrapped in foil on the counter. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But as Griffin drove to his extra shift, the simple gesture felt like the first crack in a very thick wall. One small step toward healing, toward hope. And for now, that would have to be enough. The winter sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Pastor Raina's office, casting pools of colored light across the worn carpet. Mariah sat stiffly in one of the armchairs, her arms crossed over her chest. Griffin occupied the chair beside her, while Raina settled behind her desk, her gentle presence filling the small space. This is a safe place, Raina said softly, her accent wrapping warmly around the words. Whatever is shared here stays here. Mariah glanced at Griffin, then back at her shoes. I don't need therapy. Think of it as a conversation, Raina suggested. One where everyone gets to speak their truth without judgment. Griffin cleared his throat. Maybe I should start. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his clasped hands. I never told you the whole story, Mariah. About why I left. Mariah's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. The Marines changed me, Griffin began. I came back different, angry, couldn't sleep, jumped at every sound. His voice grew hoarse. Your mother tried to help, but I pushed her away. The nightmares got worse. One night, I thought I heard gunfire. It was just a car backfiring, but I grabbed you both and forced you to hide in the closet for hours. Raina watched them both carefully as Griffin continued. The brass called it PTSD, gave me a dishonorable discharge when I couldn't keep it together. He swallowed hard. The shame ate at me. The looks we got, a mixed couple in that neighborhood, me acting crazy, it was too much. I convinced myself you'd both be better off without me. You were wrong, Mariah said quietly. But some of the ice had left her voice. I know that now, Griffin agreed. I tried to find you when you were 12, tracked down your mother's new address in Cincinnati, but she'd remarried. You seemed happy in the photos I saw through the window. I was a mess. I thought showing up would only hurt you more. Mariah's fingers played with the hem of her sweater. Mom's husband turned out to be a drunk. We left when I was 15. She paused. Would have been nice to have somewhere else to go. The silence hung heavy between them. Raina let it stretch, giving them space to feel the weight of their shared pain. Later that afternoon, back at Griffin's apartment, Mariah sat cross-legged on the living room floor with Hope in her lap. Sammy had spread his dinosaur collection in a neat semicircle around them, carefully explaining each one's name and species. This is Terry the T-Rex, he said softly, holding up a well-loved plastic dinosaur. He's scary looking, but actually very gentle, like Dad. Mariah glanced at Griffin, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen. He pretended not to hear, but his movements slowed as he listened. And this is Sarah the Stegosaurus, Sammy continued, showing Hope a blue dinosaur. She's named after my mom. She's in heaven now, but Dad says she watches over us. Hope gurgled, reaching for the toy. Sammy carefully let her hold it, beaming when she didn't immediately try to put it in her mouth. You're good with her, Mariah said. I like being a big brother, Sammy replied matter-of-factly, even though I'm actually the little brother. It's confusing, but nice. A small laugh escaped Mariah's lips, surprising her. It had been so long since she'd laughed, without thinking about it first. From the kitchen came the quiet sounds of Griffin's evening prayer. Lord, thank you for this food and for bringing my family together. Help us heal. Amen. Mariah watched him through the doorway, noting how he crossed himself the way her mother had taught her. Some habits, it seemed, hadn't changed. That evening, as the temperature dropped outside, Sammy appeared in the living room with 4 mugs of hot cocoa balanced carefully on a tray. He'd been practicing carrying things without spilling, and his face shone with pride as he set the tray down without incident. I put extra marshmallows in yours, he told Mariah, handing her a mug decorated with cartoon penguins. Dad says sweet things help when you're sad. I'm not sad, Mariah started to say, but stopped herself. Thank you, Sammy. He settled beside her on the couch, his own cocoa clutched in both hands. You have pretty eyes like a princess, he said suddenly. They're brown with little gold spots, just like in my fairy tale book. Mariah blinked, caught off guard by the simple, honest compliment. A smile tugged at her lips, genuine and unguarded. Thanks, buddy. Griffin, watching from his armchair with Hope dozing in his arms, saw something in his daughter's expression soften. The defensive wall she'd maintained since arriving showed its first real crack. Not gone, but beginning to crumble. They sat together in comfortable silence, sipping cocoa and listening to the winter wind outside. Mariah's shoulders gradually relaxed, and when Sammy leaned against her side, she didn't pull away. Hope slept peacefully, making tiny snuffling sounds that made them all smile. I'm tired, Mariah admitted quietly, staring into her empty mug. The words seemed to carry more weight than their surface meaning. Griffin nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. You don't have to run anymore. She didn't respond, but she didn't disagree either. Instead, she let Sammy show her his favorite picture book. Their heads bent together over the pages as the evening grew deeper and the world outside grew still. Griffin's hands trembled slightly as he pulled the small artificial Christmas tree from its dusty box. He hadn't set up holiday decorations since Sarah passed, but something about having Mariah and Hope here made him want to try again. The tree was only 4 feet tall, with built-in white lights that still worked after all these years in storage. He glanced at his watch. Mariah would be back from her counseling session with Pastor Raina soon. Sammy sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully unwrapping old ornaments from yellowed tissue paper. "Can I put the star on top, Dad?" Sammy asked, holding up the tarnished gold topper. "Sure thing, buddy. Let me lift you up when we're ready." Griffin smiled, watching his son meticulously arrange the ornaments by color. The apartment was warm and smelled like the pot roast simmering in the slow cooker, Sarah's old recipe. Griffin had started it early that morning, remembering how much Mariah used to love pot roast as a little girl. He reached into his back pocket and touched the wrapped package there, making sure it was still secure. The photo had been in his wallet so long that the edges were soft and worn. He'd had it laminated and framed at the drugstore that morning before work. The sound of keys in the door made both Griffin and Sammy look up. Mariah entered, carrying Hope bundled against the cold. She stopped short when she saw the tree. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It's Christmas decorations," Sammy announced, bouncing to his feet. "Come see the ornaments. This one's my favorite. It's a penguin wearing a scarf." Mariah's expression softened as she watched Sammy's excitement. She unwrapped Hope from her blankets and set her in the baby swing Griffin had bought secondhand last week. "I thought." Griffin cleared his throat. "Well, I thought maybe we could. Decorate it together, if you want." Mariah stood there for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, sure." They spent the next hour hanging ornaments while Hope watched from her swing, occasionally cooing and reaching toward the twinkling lights. Sammy provided running commentary on each decoration, making up stories about where they came from. "And this one," he said, holding up a painted ceramic bell, "probably came from space aliens who celebrate Christmas too." That got a genuine laugh from Mariah. Griffin watched as she helped Sammy hang the bell, noting how gentle she was with him, how naturally they had begun to bond. When the tree was almost finished, Griffin lifted Sammy to place the star on top. The lights caught the gold finish, making it sparkle. "It's beautiful," Mariah said quietly, almost to herself. Griffin took a deep breath and pulled the small package from his pocket. "I have something for you." Mariah looked surprised, then wary. "You didn't have to." "I know. I wanted to." He held out the carefully wrapped gift, trying to keep his hand steady. She took it slowly, turning it over in her hands. Hope gurgled from her swing, and Sammy watched with wide-eyed interest as Mariah carefully peeled back the paper. When she saw the frame, her breath caught. The photo showed a 4-year-old Mariah in pigtails, wearing a yellow sundress and holding a melting ice cream cone. Her smile was wide and carefree. "You kept this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Griffin nodded, his throat tight. "Always. Every day." Mariah ran her fingers over the glass, tracing the outline of her younger self. A tear splashed onto the frame, and she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you," she said softly, still looking at the photo. The timer on the slow cooker buzzed, making them all jump slightly. "Dinner's ready," Griffin announced, grateful for the distraction. "Sammy, can you help set the table?" They gathered around the small kitchen table, which felt full for the first time in years. The pot roast filled the apartment with warmth and savory aromas. Griffin said grace, while Sammy bounced impatiently in his chair and Mariah fed Hope tiny spoonfuls of baby food. "This is just like Mom used to make," Mariah said after her first bite, surprise in her voice. Griffin nodded. "Sarah helped me learn the recipe. She knew it was your favorite." Sammy looked between them, a big smile on his face. "This is the best day ever," he declared, pot roast gravy on his chin. They ate together, the conversation easier than it had been before. Sammy told stories about school, and Mariah actually laughed at his impression of his science teacher. The photo sat propped against the windowsill, catching the last rays of winter sunshine. When dinner was finished, Hope started to fuss. Mariah stood up, then hesitated. "Dad?" she said, the word coming out uncertain, but clear. "Would you hold her while I wash these dishes?" Griffin had to blink hard several times, his vision suddenly blurry. "Sure," he managed, keeping his voice steady as he stood to take the baby. "Sure, I can do that." He cradled Hope against his chest, breathing in her baby powder smell, while Mariah and Sammy worked together at the sink. Through the window, he could see snow starting to fall, big flakes drifting down in the gathering dusk. Hope snuggled against him, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. Behind him, he could hear Sammy teaching Mariah their special dishwashing song, their voices mixing with the soft clinking of plates and the gentle humming of the Christmas tree lights. The night was still, except for the soft whirring of the heating system. Mariah tossed in her sleep, tangled in the sheets of Sammy's bottom bunk. Above her, Hope slept peacefully in her portable crib, while Sammy dozed in the top bunk, his dinosaur nightlight casting gentle shadows on the wall. In her dream, Mariah was back in the dark van. The musty smell of cigarettes and cheap beer filled her nostrils as Marcus, the crew's leader, barked orders from the driver's seat. Just walk in like you own the place, pretty girl. Cry if you have to. Make them feel sorry for you. The familiar panic rose in her chest as Dream Marcus grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. Don't mess this up, or your baby won't eat this week. The van's metal floor vibrated beneath her feet, and the darkness pressed in closer. Mariah bolted upright with a scream, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sweat dampened her t-shirt as she gasped for air, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar room before remembering where she was, safe, in her father's apartment. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The door flew open, and Griffin appeared in his worn gray sweatpants and faded Marine's t-shirt, his eyes alert despite the late hour. Mariah, what's wrong? I'm sorry, she whispered, noticing Sammy stirring above. Just a nightmare. I didn't mean to wake everyone. Griffin's shoulders relaxed slightly, but concern remained etched on his face. He approached carefully, like someone approaching a spooked animal. Want to talk about it? Kitchen's quiet. Mariah glanced at Hope, still sleeping soundly, then nodded. She followed Griffin to the kitchen, where he filled 2 mugs with water and put them in the microwave for hot chocolate. The familiar routine, one she'd watched him do with Sammy, made her throat tight. It was about the crew, she said finally, wrapping her arms around herself. The people I used to run with. Griffin set the steaming mugs down and sat across from her at the small kitchen table. His face remained neutral, but his jaw tightened. The ones who made you steal? They didn't make me. Not at first. Mariah stared into her cocoa. I chose it. I was desperate, sleeping in shelters with Hope. Marcus, he's their leader. He made it sound so easy. Just be a distraction, he said. Look helpless. While security was busy with me, they'd clean out the stockroom. Griffin's hands clenched around his mug. They used you as bait. Yeah. Mariah's voice cracked. But it got worse. They started talking about bigger scores, armed robbery. I told him I was done, but Marcus said I knew too much. He threatened Hope. She wiped angrily at her eyes. That's when I ran. Jesus, Mariah. Griffin's voice was rough with emotion. He reached across the table but stopped short of touching her hand. We need to report this to the police. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. They have people everywhere. Cops, security guards. If they find out, I talked. She shuddered. Pastor Reyna might know someone trustworthy in law enforcement. Griffin suggested gently. Someone who handles sensitive cases. Mariah shook her head. I can't risk it. Not with Hope. They sat in heavy silence for a moment. Outside, a car alarm went off briefly before falling quiet again. Listen to me, Griffin said finally, his voice low and intense. I know I wasn't there when you needed me before, but I'm here now. I won't let anyone hurt you or Hope. You can't promise that, Mariah whispered. Watch me. The steel in his voice made her look up. His eyes, so like her own, held the same determination she remembered from her childhood, when he used to check her closet for monsters. I've got some savings. Been looking at better paying security positions at the VA hospital across town. Better benefits too. Dad. The words slipped out before she could stop it. We could move somewhere safer, he continued, pretending not to notice how his eyes had gotten misty at her word choice. A place with better schools for Sammy and Hope. 3 bedrooms instead of 2. You'd do that? Change everything? Everything already changed the moment you walked back into my life. Griffin's voice was gruff with emotion. I'm not losing you again. From down the hall came Hope's soft whimper, followed by Sammy's sleepy voice. It's okay, Hope. Want to see my glow-in-the-dark stegosaurus? Mariah gave a watery laugh. I should go check on them. Yeah. Griffin stood, collecting their mugs. Try to get some sleep. I'll be right down the hall if you need me. Later, as Mariah lay awake listening to Hope's gentle breathing, she heard the soft tap of computer keys from the living room. Through the cracked door, she could see Griffin's silhouette, hunched over his laptop, working on his resume in the dim light of the Christmas tree. The next morning, Griffin was already dressed for work when Mariah came out of the bedroom. A stack of printed papers sat on the kitchen counter. Job applications for various security positions at the VA hospital. "I'll drop these off before my shift," he said, pouring coffee into his thermos. "Pastor Rain is coming by later to help you with Hope's vaccination paperwork." Mariah nodded, something warm and unfamiliar expanding in her chest as she watched him gather his things. It felt dangerously like Hope. "Dad?" she called as he reached for the door. He turned, his hand frozen on the doorknob. "Be careful today, okay?" Griffin's face softened. "Always am, sweetheart. Always am." The evening settled quietly over the apartment complex. Mariah sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Sammy with his dinosaur puzzle while baby Hope cooed in her bouncer. Outside, streetlights flickered on one by one as dusk deepened into night. "This piece goes here," Sammy said softly, fitting together two sections of a triceratops. "See the horns?" Mariah smiled, watching her little brother's careful movements. "You're really good at this, Sammy." The peaceful moment shattered with an explosive crash. Glass sprayed across the carpet as a brick sailed through the window, sending Hope into startled wails. Mariah's heart jumped into her throat. "Under the bed!" she screamed to Sammy, but he was already moving, scooping up Hope with surprising strength for a 10-year-old. His face was pale but determined as he hurried toward his bedroom. "The closet's safer," he whispered, disappearing inside with the crying baby. Mariah's hands shook as she grabbed her phone, ducking behind the couch. She hit Griffin's number on speed dial, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. The words still felt strange on her tongue. Someone threw a brick through the window. "Sammy has Hope. They're hiding. I'm coming home right now." Griffin's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Call 911. Don't move. Is anyone hurt?" "No, we're okay." Mariah peered around the couch toward the broken window. "Just scared. Stay on the line with me. I'm leaving now." She could hear him running, keys jingling. Mariah dialed 911 with trembling fingers, keeping her voice low as she reported the incident. The operator's calm voice helped steady her nerves, but her eyes kept darting to the jagged hole in the window where cold air whistled through. From Sammy's closet came Hope's muffled whimpers and Sammy's gentle shushing. He was singing to her softly, the same lullaby Griffin used at bedtime. The sound made Mariah's throat tight. Red and blue lights flooded the apartment just as Griffin's key turned in the lock. He burst in, still in his security guard uniform, face etched with worry. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the scattered glass and his shaken daughter. "Where are they?" he asked hoarsely. "Closet," Mariah whispered. Griffin strode to Sammy's room, calling out softly, "It's Dad. You can come out now." The closet door creaked open. Sammy emerged, still holding Hope close to his chest. His dinosaur nightlight glowed behind him, casting a protective aura around the children. "I kept her safe," Sammy said solemnly. "Just like you taught me." Griffin gathered them both in his arms, pressing his face into Sammy's hair. "You did good, son. Real good." Two police officers entered, notebooks ready. As they took statements, Griffin noticed something white near the brick. He pointed it out to one of the officers, who carefully retrieved a crumpled note. The officer read it aloud. "You can't hide forever. Pay what you owe, or next time we won't miss." Mariah's face went ash white. She sank onto the couch, Hope now cradled in her arms. "It's Marcus's crew. They found us." Griffin's jaw clenched. He spoke quietly with the officers while Sammy pressed against Mariah's side, his small hand patting Hope's back. The baby had finally stopped crying, hiccuping softly against her mother's shoulder. After the police left, Griffin immediately got to work. He covered the broken window with a thick piece of plywood from his trunk, then pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Mike from the hardware store," he explained, already dialing. "He owes me a favor. We're getting security cameras installed tonight." "Dad, it's almost midnight," Mariah protested. "Don't care." Griffin's voice was firm. "This isn't waiting till morning." An hour later, Mike arrived with cameras and mounting equipment. Griffin helped him install them, one facing the parking lot, one covering the walkway to their door, and one overlooking the window. The system linked directly to Griffin's phone. Inside, Mariah had finally coaxed Sammy to bed, though he insisted on keeping his closet door open. Hope slept in her portable crib next to Mariah's bed, one tiny fist curled around her mother's finger. Griffin found Mariah in the kitchen, staring into a cold cup of tea. "I'll go to the police station first thing tomorrow," she said quietly. "Tell them everything about Marcus and the crew. I should have done it sooner." "You were protecting Hope." Griffin sat across from her. "But you're right. It's time. We'll go together." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I brought this danger to your home. To Sammy." Griffin reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "This is your home too, and we protect our own." Mariah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd have this. Again, a family." "Get some sleep," Griffin said gently. "I'll take first watch." After Mariah retired to her room, Griffin retrieved his old baseball bat from the hall closet. He positioned himself on the couch with a clear view of both the window and the front door. The bat lay across his lap, its worn handle smooth and familiar in his grip. The apartment settled into silence, broken only by the soft whir of the heating system and distant traffic. Griffin sat motionless in the darkness, his military training kicking in as he maintained his vigil. His phone screen glowed softly, showing 3 different camera angles of the quiet exterior. He thought of Sammy's bravery, of Mariah's fear, of tiny Hope who deserved better than this chaos. His grip tightened on the bat. Tomorrow they would go to the police, set things in motion to end this threat. But tonight, he would guard his family's sleep, ready to face whatever came through that door. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the scattered glass on the ground like nature's own attempt to heal the night's wounds. Griffin watched it through the plywood-covered window, his resolve hardening with each passing hour. No one would hurt his children again. Not while he drew breath. The church basement hummed with warmth and chatter as families gathered for the community holiday dinner. Colorful paper chains and twinkling lights draped across the ceiling, and the rich smell of home-cooked food filled the air. Griffin held the door open as Mariah carried Hope inside, with Sammy close behind, clutching his favorite dinosaur. "Welcome, welcome." Pastor Raina's voice rang out as she hurried over. She wore a festive red sweater, and her dark eyes sparkled with joy. "I'm so glad you all could make it." She bent down to Sammy's level. "And I hear someone here is quite the musician?" Sammy nodded shyly, peeking out from behind Griffin's leg. "I like music," he whispered. "Well, we have a special surprise for you." Raina gestured toward a corner where a small electronic keyboard sat on a table. "Would you like to try it?" Sammy's eyes lit up, and he looked up at Griffin for permission. Griffin smiled and gave him a gentle nudge forward. "Go ahead, buddy." As Sammy scampered off with Raina, Mariah shifted Hope to her other hip, taking in the scene. Families sat at long tables, covered in red and green tablecloths. Children darted between chairs, paper plates, piled high with food. The atmosphere felt worlds away from the cold streets she'd known. "The serving line could use another pair of hands," Griffin suggested gently. "I can watch Hope." Mariah hesitated, then carefully passed the baby to her father. "Just for a little while," she said. At the serving station, elderly church ladies welcomed Mariah with warm smiles and spare aprons. Mrs. Rodriguez, a grandmother with silver-streaked hair, showed her how to portion the mountains of food. "Such a beautiful baby you have," she said, ladling out steaming rice and beans. "How old?" "6 months," Mariah replied, surprised by how easy it felt to talk. "She just started trying solid foods." "Ah, such a wonderful age. You must join our Young Mothers group. We meet Tuesday mornings, childcare provided." From across the room came the sound of jingle bells, played carefully, one note at a time. Sammy sat at the keyboard, his face a mask of concentration as Raina showed him where to place his fingers. A small group of children gathered around, swaying to the simple melody. Griffin appeared beside Mariah with Hope, who was starting to fuss. "Someone's hungry," he said apologetically. "I'll take her." Mariah untied her apron. "Mrs. Rodriguez was just telling me about their mother's group." "Oh yes." Raina had joined them, her face glowing. "We'd love to have you, Mariah. Many of our young moms have overcome similar struggles. They support each other, share resources. No pressure, but there's always a place for you." Mariah looked down at Hope, who was contentedly gumming her fist. The thought of belonging somewhere, of having other mothers to talk to, tugged at something deep inside her. I think I'd like that," she said quietly. "Wonderful." Raina clapped her hands, and, speaking of wonderful, she gestured to where Sammy was now playing Silent Night, his small fingers finding each note with careful precision. A circle of listeners had gathered, some humming along. "He's got quite a gift," Griffin said proudly. "That he does." Raina's hand brushed Griffin's arm, and Mariah noticed her father's slight blush. "You know, we could use his talents in our children's music program." The evening flowed on, filled with small moments of grace. Mariah found herself relaxing as she fed Hope, watching Sammy make friends with other kids his age. The constant tension in her shoulders began to ease. As dinner wound down, someone put on recorded Christmas music. The center of the room cleared for dancing. Mostly, it was kids, twirling and jumping, but a few couples joined in. Pastor Raina, a small girl, tugged at her sleeve. "Dance with us." Raina laughed. "Oh, I don't know." "Come on," Griffin said suddenly, standing up. "Show us how it's done." Raina's eyes widened in surprise, but she took his offered hand. They moved to the makeshift dance floor, swaying awkwardly at first to White Christmas. Griffin's security guard stoicism melted slightly as Raina showed him some simple steps. Soon they were turning in slow circles, both trying not to step on each other's feet and laughing when they did. Mariah watched, bouncing Hope gently. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her father laugh like that, free and unguarded. Sammy appeared at her side, beaming. "Dad's dancing!" he exclaimed. "He sure is," Mariah said, grinning. "Pretty silly, huh?" Sammy shook his head. "No, happy." The word echoed in Mariah's heart as she looked around the church basement. Christmas lights twinkled overhead. The smell of cinnamon and coffee mingled with the sound of laughter. Sammy leaned against her chair, humming along to the music. Hope drowsed in her arms, warm and safe. For this moment, at least, they were just a normal family at a normal church dinner. No dark past lurking in the shadows, no fear of tomorrow, just the present. Imperfect, but beautiful. The song ended, and Griffin and Raina made their way back to the table, both slightly out of breath and pink-cheeked. "I had no idea you could dance," Raina teased. "Neither did I," Griffin admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. More laughter bubbled up around the table, filling the church hall with its bright music. Mariah looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had left, but the one who had stayed, who had opened his door on a cold night, who was trying, in his own way, to build something new from the broken pieces of their past. She shifted Hope to one arm and reached out with her free hand to squeeze his briefly. His eyes met hers, surprised and grateful. No words were needed. Around them, the sounds of joy and community continued to echo through the warm, light-filled room. Griffin's muscles ached as he climbed the apartment stairs after his double shift. The hallway lights flickered dimly overhead, casting strange shadows on the worn carpet. He'd taken the extra hours to save for a bigger place, somewhere safer for his growing family. His keys jingled in his tired hands as he approached his door. His heart stopped. The door stood slightly open, a dark gap showing where it should have been firmly closed. Griffin's security training kicked in instantly. He pressed himself against the wall, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. The street lamp outside cast just enough light through the gap to show disarray inside. "No, no, no," he whispered, his voice catching. Pushing the door open slowly, Griffin entered the apartment in a crouch. The living room was destroyed. The small Christmas tree lay toppled, its ornaments scattered and crushed. Family photos had been ripped from the walls, their frames shattered on the floor. The couch cushions were slashed open, stuffing spilled across the carpet like snow. "Mariah?" His voice cracked as he called out. "Sammy?" Silence answered him. Griffin moved through the chaos, his feet crunching on broken glass. The kitchen chairs were overturned, cabinet doors hung open, and dishes lay broken on the linoleum. A pot of half-cooked pasta sat cold on the stove, dinner interrupted. His hand shook as he reached for the light switch in the hallway. Nothing happened. The bulb had been broken. "Sammy? Son? Are you here?" A tiny whimper came from Sammy's bedroom. Griffin rushed forward, his heart pounding. The room was dark, but he could make out the overturned dresser, clothes strewn everywhere. Hope's portable crib was empty, tipped on its side. Another whimper came from under the bed. Griffin dropped to his knees, peering into the darkness. There, pressed against the wall, was Sammy. His son's face was streaked with tears, his favorite dinosaur clutched tight against his chest. "Sammy," Griffin choked out, reaching for him. "Come here, buddy. It's Dad." Sammy didn't move. His eyes were wide and unseeing, locked in whatever horror he'd witnessed. His whole body trembled. "It's okay now. I'm here," Griffin whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you come out?" Sammy didn't respond. He rocked slightly, a self-soothing motion Griffin recognized from his son's most overwhelming moments. Whatever had happened had sent Sammy deep into himself, to that quiet place he went when the world became too much. Griffin's gaze fell on something pale near the bed. Hope's blanket, the one Raina had given her, lay torn and crumpled on the floor. He picked it up with trembling hands, and the reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave out. Griffin collapsed beside the bed, clutching the blanket to his chest as sobs racked his body. The tears came hard and fast, years of carefully maintained control shattering in an instant. His daughter was gone again. His granddaughter was gone. And this time, it wasn't his own mistakes that had taken them. They'd been stolen from him. Through his tears, Griffin fumbled for his phone. He could barely see the screen, but his fingers found Raina's number automatically. The phone rang once, twice. "Griffin?" Raina's warm voice answered. "It's late. Is everything?" "They took them." The words came out in a broken whisper. "They took them. Raina. Mariah and Hope are gone." The fluorescent lights in the police station buzzed overhead, making Griffin's headache worse. He sat rigid in the hard plastic chair. His hands clasped so tight, his knuckles were white. Next to him, Pastor Raina kept a steady hand on his arm, grounding him as the detective flipped through his notes with maddening slowness. "And you're certain it was forced?" "Entry?" Detective Morris asked, not looking up from his notepad. Griffin's jaw clenched. The door was broken open. The place was torn apart. "My daughter and granddaughter are missing." "What else do you need to know?" Raina squeezed his arm gently. "We understand you need to be thorough," she said to the detective, her voice calm but firm. "But time is critical here." The detective nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "We'll put out an alert, but without more concrete evidence of who took them." Griffin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I have security footage from cameras I installed last week." That got the detective's attention, but the process of reviewing the footage and filing reports dragged on for another 2 hours. By the time they left the station, Griffin felt like he was going to explode. "This isn't enough," he muttered, as they walked to the parking lot. "They're treating this like it's just paperwork." Raina stopped him with a gentle touch. "What are you thinking, Griffin?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I know someone. Marcus Chen. We served together in the Marines. He runs a private security firm now." "You trust him?" Griffin nodded. "With my life, already did. More than once." 20 minutes later, they sat in Marcus's office, a sparse room with military precision in its organization. Marcus, still fit despite being in his mid-50s, studied the security footage on his laptop. His eyes narrowed as he froze the frame on one of the intruders. "There." Griffin pointed at the screen. "On his neck." Marcus zoomed in on a distinctive tattoo visible when the man turned his head, a curved dagger with a snake wrapped around it. "You recognize this?" "One of Mariah's old crew. She described it to me. The leader's right-hand man. Goes by Snake." Griffin's voice was tight with controlled rage. Marcus typed rapidly on his keyboard, pulling up various databases. Real name, Timothy. Vickers. Multiple priors for assault, trafficking, grand theft. Known associate of the East Side Kings gang. He looked up at Griffin. "This is serious business, Lee. These guys don't play around." "Neither do I." Griffin's voice was steel. "Not when it comes to my family." Raina leaned forward. "What can you tell us about their usual locations? Known hideouts?" Marcus pulled up a map, marking several points. "They operate mainly in these areas. Abandoned warehouses, condemned buildings. But they move around a lot. I need to find them." Griffin stood up, his body coiled with tension. "I can't just sit here while my daughter and granddaughter—" "Griffin." Raina's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to be smart about this. Rushing in without a plan could make things worse." Marcus nodded in agreement. "I can help. I've got contacts, resources." But Raina's right. We need to do this carefully. Back at Griffin's apartment, Sammy sat on the couch, his eyes red from crying. He hadn't spoken since they found him under the bed. Griffin knelt in front of his son, heart breaking at the fear in those young eyes. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "We're going to find them. I promise." Sammy looked up, then suddenly scrambled off the couch. He disappeared into his room and returned clutching his favorite toy, the stuffed green dinosaur that he'd let Hope play with that first morning. "For luck," Sammy whispered, pressing the dinosaur into Griffin's hands. "Rex is brave. He'll help you find them." Griffin pulled his son into a tight hug, fighting back tears. "Thank you, Sammy. I'll keep him safe until we bring your sister and Hope home." Raina watched from the doorway, her own eyes wet. "I'll stay with Sammy," she said. "Mrs. Martinez from church will help too. We'll take good care of him." Griffin nodded, carefully tucking the dinosaur into his jacket pocket. He turned to Marcus, who was studying building layouts on his tablet. "Where do we start?" "I've got 3 possible locations," Marcus replied. "And I'm calling in some favors. We'll have backup if we need it." "Griffin," Raina called as they headed for the door. He turned back, and she met his eyes with fierce intensity. "Be careful. Sammy needs his father, and—" She hesitated, then continued softly. "So do I." Griffin's expression softened for a moment. He touched her hand briefly, then straightened his shoulders. The former Marine was visible in his bearing now, in the cold focus of his eyes. "I'll bring them home," he said. "Whatever it takes." The toy dinosaur pressed against his chest as he followed Marcus out into the gathering dusk, its small plastic heart beating with his son's trust and love. He would not fail them. Not again. Griffin's old pickup crawled through Cleveland's east side, its headlights cutting through the winter darkness. Every street corner seemed to harbor shadows, and broken streetlights created perfect hiding spots for trouble. He knew this area well. It as well was the kind of neighborhood cops avoided after dark. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he approached the address his Marine buddy had texted. The smell of frozen garbage and burning trash filled the air. Abandoned houses lined both sides of the street, their windows either boarded up or broken, their yards overgrown and littered with debris. The burner phone in his pocket vibrated. Pastor Raina's message read, "Police are standing by. Please be careful. We're praying." Griffin parked 3 blocks away, behind a defunct laundromat. His military training kicked in as he conducted a thorough surveillance sweep of the area. The target house stood out, a dilapidated 2-story with fresh graffiti and dim light seeping through newspaper-covered windows. Unlike its abandoned neighbors, this one showed signs of life. He settled into position behind a rusted dumpster, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Sammy's plastic dinosaur pressed against his chest from his jacket pocket, a reminder of what was at stake. The night grew colder as he watched and waited, documenting every detail. Over the next 4 hours, Griffin observed their patterns. 2 guys smoking on the front porch every hour. A lookout on the second floor, visible through a torn section of newspaper. 3 different cars came and went, always backing into the driveway for a quick escape. 6 hostiles confirmed, he whispered into his phone, recording notes for Raina to relay to police. 1 in the front room, 2 on rotation outside, 1 upstairs, 2 moving between floors. No sign of Mariah or Hope yet. His trained eye had already identified multiple entry points. The basement window wells were unguarded. A rusty fire escape hung precariously on the north side. But the basement offered the best chance. Dark, quiet, and likely to have the fewest guards. Pastor Raina's response came quickly. "Prayer chain is active at church. Officer Martinez has units positioned 5 blocks out. Please wait for backup." Griffin typed back. "No time. They could move them any minute. Going in through basement. Have ambulance ready just in case." He checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. The night shift's drowsiest hour. The guards would be tired, less alert. It was time. Moving like a shadow, Griffin used the abandoned houses for cover as he worked his way closer. His combat boots, still silent after all these years, carried him soundlessly across frozen grass. The smell of marijuana drifted down from an upstairs window, along with muffled rap music. The basement window well was exactly as he remembered from his surveillance. Rusted metal frame, cracked glass, easy access. Griffin eased himself down into the concrete hole, his back pressed against the cold foundation. Above, boots crunched on snow as a guard passed. Griffin held his breath, counting footsteps until they faded. Then, with practiced precision, he removed the putty knife from his jacket. The old window latch gave way. Easily. He caught the frame before it could squeak, easing it open just enough to slip through. The basement air hit him like a tomb, musty, damp, and thick with the sweet, sour smell of mold. Griffin's eyes adjusted to the darkness as he crouched motionless, listening. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The bass from the music upstairs vibrated through the ceiling. And there, the faintest sound of a baby's whimper. His heart clenched. Hope was here. Griffin moved carefully through the basement, stepping over broken furniture and avoiding patches of light from the street that filtered through the dirty windows. His hand touched the basement stairs, testing each one before putting his weight down. At the top, he pressed his ear to the door. Voices argued upstairs. Something about money and territory. A TV blared in another room, but closer, just on the other side of the door, he heard it again. Hope's distinctive cry, quickly muffled. Griffin's fingers closed around Sammy's, dinosaur in his pocket. "I'm coming, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's here." He eased the door open a crack, peering through. A narrow hallway led to the kitchen. A single bulb cast yellow light over peeling linoleum, and there, sitting on a dirty mattress with Hope clutched to her chest, was Mariah. A thick chain ran from her ankle to a radiator pipe. Griffin's vision went red with rage, but his military training kept him focused. He counted 2 guards in the kitchen, their backs turned as they played cards at a folding table. Another voice called down from upstairs. This was his window. He pulled out his phone one last time, texting Raina, "Found them. Basement level, northeast corner. Tell police to move in on my signal." Then he pocketed the phone, took a deep breath, and prepared to rescue his daughters, both of them, or die trying. The basement door opened without a sound as Griffin stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding, but his hands steady. Every skill he'd learned in the Marines, every night patrol in hostile territory, had prepared him for this moment. The gap between him and Mariah seemed to stretch for miles, but he knew it was only a matter of seconds before someone would spot him. The abandoned building loomed before Griffin, its broken windows like dark, hungry eyes. His military training kicked in as he crept through the basement entrance. Each step calculated and silent despite his racing heart. The musty smell of mold and decay filled his nostrils as he navigated the darkness, guided only by the dim light of his phone screen. Voices echoed from above, harsh whispers and heavy footsteps. Griffin pressed himself against a wall, his breath shallow and controlled. He could hear a baby's whimper, then Mariah's soft, soothing whisper. His chest tightened. They were alive. Following the sounds, Griffin made his way up a creaking staircase, freezing at each step that threatened to give away his position. The second floor was barely lit by street lights filtering through broken windows. Empty beer bottles and cigarette butts littered the floor, crunching softly under his boots. A man's voice carried down the hallway. "Shut that kid up, or I will." Griffin's blood ran cold. He inched closer to a partially open door, where a weak light flickered. Through the crack, he could see Mariah sitting on a dirty mattress, her hands bound behind her back. Despite her split lip and the bruise darkening her cheek, she curved her body protectively around Hope, who was nestled against her chest. "It's okay, baby," Mariah whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "Mama's here." "Shh." A tall figure paced the room, his tattooed arms visible in the dim light. Griffin recognized him from the security footage, the same skull tattoo that had given them the lead. The man kicked an empty can toward Mariah, making her flinch. Griffin's fingers tightened around his phone. He'd texted their location to Raina and his security contact. The police were coming, but Hope's increasing fussiness made him realize he couldn't wait. Any moment now, that man might lose his patience. Taking a deep breath, Griffin pushed the door open. The hinges creaked, and the tattooed man spun around. His eyes widened in recognition. Clearly, he hadn't expected a middle-aged security guard to find them. "Get away from my daughter," Griffin growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man laughed, pulling out a knife. "Your daughter? Man, you're too late to play daddy now." Griffin's military training took over. As the man lunged, Griffin sidestepped, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting hard. The knife clattered to the floor. They grappled, crashing into the wall. Despite his age, Griffin's protective rage gave him strength. He landed a solid punch to the man's jaw, following with a knee to the stomach that doubled him over. "Daddy!" Mariah cried out, her voice breaking with relief and fear. The man recovered quickly, tackling Griffin. They rolled across the dirty floor, trading blows. Griffin took a hit to the ribs that made him gasp, but he managed to get the upper hand, pinning the younger man down. One solid punch knocked him unconscious. Panting heavily, Griffin scrambled to his feet and rushed to Mariah. His hands shook as he untied her bonds, trying to be gentle despite his urgency. "I'm sorry," Mariah sobbed as soon as her hands were free. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. They followed me from the church. I couldn't..." Shh. Griffin pulled her close, careful of Hope between them. You're safe now. Both of you are safe. Hope, seemingly sensing the danger was past, reached up and patted Griffin's cheek with her tiny hand, letting out a happy giggle that made both father and daughter cry harder. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Griffin helped Mariah to her feet, supporting her as she swayed. Can you walk? She nodded, clutching Hope tighter. They made their way down the stairs, just as police. Cars screeched to a halt outside, their red and blue lights painting the street in urgent colors. Officers swarmed the building, weapons drawn. In the safety of the street, Griffin finally allowed himself to really look at Mariah. Her face was tear-streaked and bruised, but her eyes held a strength that reminded him so much of her mother. He pulled her into another embrace, and this time she didn't resist. I thought I'd lost you again, he choked out, his tears falling into her hair. I thought, you found us, Mariah whispered, her free arm tightening around him. You actually came for us. Hope, sandwiched between them, reached up again to touch Griffin's wet cheek, her innocent laughter balm to their raw emotions. She grabbed his nose, making him laugh despite everything. Sir, a paramedic approached them gently. We need to check them out. Griffin nodded, reluctantly letting go. As the paramedics guided Mariah and Hope toward the waiting ambulance, he watched them with burning eyes. His ribs ached, his knuckles were bleeding, but none of that mattered. His family was safe. Police officers led the handcuffed gang members to waiting patrol cars. Griffin recognized several faces from Mariah's descriptions to the police. The tattooed man was last, his face swollen from their fight. He glared at Griffin as he was led past, but Griffin barely noticed. A familiar voice called out. Griffin! Raina ran toward them, her pastor's collar visible under her winter coat. Thank God! She hugged him quickly before rushing to the ambulance, where Mariah and Hope were being examined. Griffin followed, climbing into the ambulance to sit beside Mariah. Hope was already falling asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted but unharmed. The paramedic cleaned Mariah's split lip while checking her for other injuries. The hospital's waiting for us, the paramedic said kindly. They'll want to check the baby too, just to be safe. Griffin reached for Mariah's free hand, and she gripped it tightly. As the ambulance doors closed and they pulled away from the scene, Mariah leaned her head against his shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on us, she whispered. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile hospital corridor as Griffin paced outside the examination room. His hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the aftermath of adrenaline. Every few steps, he'd glance at the closed door, behind which doctors were checking Mariah and Hope. The wait felt endless. His shirt still carried traces of basement dust and sweat from the rescue. A nurse had cleaned the small cut on his forehead, but Griffin barely remembered getting it. All he could think about was Mariah's bruised face when he'd found her, and how tightly she'd clutched Hope to her chest. The door finally opened, and Dr. Chin emerged with a reassuring smile. Mr. Lee, your daughter and granddaughter are going to be fine. Mariah has some bruising and minor cuts, but nothing serious. Baby Hope is perfectly healthy, not even dehydrated. Your daughter did an amazing job protecting her. Griffin's legs went weak with relief. He steadied himself against the wall, closing his eyes briefly as tears threatened to spill. Can I see them? Of course, they're both ready for visitors. Inside the room, Mariah sat on the edge of the hospital bed, wearing a clean gown. Hope was sleeping peacefully in a clear plastic bassinet beside her. When Griffin entered, Mariah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but clear. Dad, she whispered, and the word hit Griffin like a physical force. He crossed the room in 3 strides and carefully wrapped his arms around her. This time, she didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, she mumbled into his shirt. I should have told you more about them. I should have... Shh, Griffin said, stroking her hair like he used to when she was tiny. You're safe now. That's all that matters. A soft knock at the door made them look up. Pastor Raina stood there, holding Sammy's hand. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in the unfamiliar hospital room. Look who wanted to see his sister, Raina said softly. Sammy approached the bed slowly, clutching his dinosaur toy. He studied Mariah's face, reaching out to touch a small bandage on her cheek with gentle fingers. Does it hurt? He asked in his quiet way. Mariah shook her head, managing a smile. Not anymore. She opened her arms, and to everyone's surprise, Sammy stepped right into them, wrapping his arms around her neck in a tight hug. Griffin watched in amazement. Sammy rarely initiated physical contact with anyone besides him. I was scared, Sammy whispered. Me too, Mariah admitted, holding him close. But your daddy saved us, just like a superhero. Hope stirred in her bassinet, making tiny cooing sounds. Sammy pulled back from the hug to peer at his niece. She's okay too? She's perfect, Mariah assured him. She looked up at Raina, who had been watching the scene with warm, Pastor Raina. I think I'm ready. Ready to really change things. No more running, no more old life. I want to do better. For Hope, for all of us. Raina stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Mariah's shoulder. The church's safe house apartment is already prepared. It's in a secure building, with good security and a playground nearby. You'll have time to heal and build a new life. Actually, a new voice chimed in from the doorway. Doctor, Chin had returned, holding some papers. Mr. Lee, I couldn't help but overhear about your security experience. We're currently hiring for a hospital security team. Better pay, full benefits. Would you be interested in a referral? Griffin blinked in surprise. Yes, absolutely. I'll have HR contact you tomorrow, Dr. Chin smiled. We take care of our own here. As the doctor left, Raina added, the apartment has 3 bedrooms. Plenty of space for all of you, if that's what you want. Griffin looked at Mariah questioningly. Hardly daring to hope, she nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, Dad, stay with us? Try and stop me, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Later that night, after being discharged and settling into the church apartment, Griffin stood in the doorway of what would be Mariah and Hope's room. The space was simple but clean, with soft yellow walls and a proper crib that Raina's congregation had donated. Mariah was already asleep, curled protectively around Hope. In the next room, he could hear Sammy's familiar soft snoring. Griffin sank to his knees beside the bed, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. He hadn't prayed properly in years, not since losing his wife, but the words came naturally now. Thank you, he whispered, his hand ghosting over Hope's tiny feet, then touching Mariah's hair softly. Thank you for bringing them back to me, for giving me a second chance. Help me be the father they deserve. Hope made a small sighing sound in her sleep, and Mariah shifted slightly, instinctively drawing her daughter closer. Griffin stayed there, watching over his family, feeling for the first time in years that he was exactly where he needed to be. The night settled around them like a gentle blanket, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed softly in the winter air. The sound of the city seemed far away now, unable to touch this moment of peace, this gift of new beginnings. The VA hospital lobby gleamed under morning sunlight, streaming through tall windows. Griffin adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to his wedding years ago, and took a deep breath. The interview panel consisted of 3 people: the head of security, a hospital administrator, and a veteran services coordinator. Their questions were direct but fair, focusing on his military background and security experience. Mr. Lee, the head of security said, leaning forward, your experience is impressive, but what really stands out is your recent handling of that situation with the gang activity. You showed remarkable restraint and judgment. Griffin's hands clasped together in his lap. Sometimes the best way to protect people isn't through force. It's through careful planning and keeping a cool head. The panel exchanged approving looks. By the end of the interview, Griffin walked out with a job offer that nearly doubled his current salary. Standing in the parking lot, he pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed Mariah's number. Dad? Her voice still held a note of hesitation using that word, but she was trying. I got it, baby girl. His voice cracked slightly. I got the job. The excited squeal on the other end of the line made him laugh. In the background, he could hear Sammy clapping and Hope's happy babbling. 3 weeks later, Griffin stood in the driveway of a modest ranch-style house, holding a cardboard box labeled Kitchen in Sammy's careful printing. The neighborhood was quiet, with well-kept yards and children's, bikes propped against fences. Pastor Raina's church had helped with the down payment, combining it with Griffin's savings to make homeownership possible. Sammy, careful with that box. Mariah called out as her little brother wobbled up the front walk with a container of his books. She followed behind, carrying Hope on her hip. I got it, Sammy assured them, his face serious with concentration. It's got all my dinosaur books inside. They need special handling. Griffin watched his children, all 3 of them, enter their new home. The sight made his chest tight with emotion. The house wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small backyard with a maple tree, but it was theirs, and it was safe. Inside, church volunteers helped arrange furniture and unpack boxes. Raina supervised the kitchen setup, putting away donated dishes and organizing cabinets. Every so often, she'd catch Griffin's eye and smile knowingly. She'd been right about faith and patience all along. That afternoon, Mariah sat at the kitchen table with a stack of GED study materials. "These practice tests are harder than I expected," she admitted, chewing on her pencil. Griffin paused from assembling a bookshelf. "You're smart, Mariah. You get that from your mother. Just take it one page at a time." She nodded, determination settling over her features. "The program coordinator says I could be ready for the test in 3 months if I work hard." "And then?" Griffin asked carefully, not wanting to push too hard. "Maybe community college?" She said it like a question. "The church has a scholarship program." "One step at a time," Griffin agreed, but his heart soared at her plans for the future. Sammy's transition back to regular school had been smoother than expected. His new teacher specialized in working with autistic children, and the smaller class size helped with his sensory issues. That morning, he'd actually been excited to go, proudly wearing his new backpack. "Dad," Sammy called, from his room. "Can you help me hang up my dinosaur poster?" "Be right there, buddy," Griffin called back, smiling at how Sammy's voice echoed differently in their new house. The sound of children, his children, filling a home again was something he'd never thought he'd experience. As evening approached, delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. Raina had stayed to help prepare their first real family dinner in the new house. Hope sat in her high chair, happily mashing banana pieces, while Mariah stirred a pot of her grandmother's arroz con gandules recipe, a dish she'd learned from memory during long nights alone. "Set the table, please, Sammy," Griffin requested, watching his son carefully carry plates to their new dining room table, a housewarming gift from the church congregation. "Can I use the special napkins?" Sammy asked, referring to the cloth napkins Raina had brought. "Of course, mi amor," Raina answered, pulling them from a drawer. "This is a special occasion." When they finally sat down to eat, Griffin looked around the table in wonder. Mariah was showing Sammy how to properly fold his napkin. Hope babbled happily in her high chair, secure between her mother and uncle. Raina blessed the food in both English and Spanish, her warm voice filling their new home with grace. The food was passed around: rice and beans, roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a crisp salad. The dishes didn't match perfectly, and the chairs were slightly mismatched, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of forks clinking against plates, of Sammy's detailed description of his new classroom, of Mariah's quiet laughter at Hope's attempts to feed herself. "Dad," Mariah said suddenly, her voice soft but clear, "thank you for everything." Griffin had to take a moment before he could respond, his throat tight with emotion. "No thanks needed, baby girl. This is how it always should have been." "Better late than never," Raina offered gently, reaching over to squeeze Griffin's hand. Sammy looked up from his plate, his face serious. "Can we say what we're thankful for? Like at Thanksgiving?" "That's a wonderful idea," Raina agreed. "I'm thankful for my new teacher," Sammy started, "and my sister, and Hope, and my dad, and Pastor Raina, and our new house, and maybe just pick one thing, mijo," Raina suggested, with a laugh. "Then I'm thankful we're all together," Sammy decided firmly. They went around the table, each offering their gratitude. When it was Griffin's turn, he looked at his family, really looked at them. Sammy, with his innocent heart and surprising wisdom. Mariah, healing and growing stronger every day. Baby Hope, who lived up to her name in every way. And Raina, whose faith had helped guide them all home. "I'm thankful for second chances," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. The evening continued with the comfortable sounds of family dinner, requests to pass the bread, gentle teasing, Hope's occasional squeals of delight, and most precious of all, laughter. Real, genuine laughter that echoed off their new walls and seemed to fill every corner with warmth. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Raina's church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. The Sunday morning service buzzed with energy as the congregation settled in, their winter coats draped over seats and children fidgeting in their Sunday best. Sammy sat in the front row, wearing his favorite dinosaur bow tie, while baby Hope cooed softly in her carrier beside him. Griffin shifted nervously in his seat, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. He glanced at Mariah, who stood at the edge of the stage, fingering the small piece of paper where she'd written her testimony. She wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the church's clothing ministry, her dark hair pulled back neatly. The bruises from her ordeal had faded, but the strength in her eyes had only grown stronger. Pastor Raina approached the pulpit, her warm presence immediately drawing everyone's attention. "Today," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "we have a special testimony from one of our newest family members, Mariah." The young mother took a deep breath and walked to the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted it. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and continued stronger. "A month ago, I was stealing formula from a grocery store. I was running from my past, from myself, and especially from my father." Griffin's eyes welled up as Mariah's gaze found his. But that night, God had other plans. The security guard who caught me wasn't just any guard. It was my dad, who I hadn't seen since I was 4 years old. A murmur rippled through the congregation. I was angry. So angry. Mariah's voice cracked. I spat at him. I cursed him. I wanted nothing to do with him. But he didn't give up on me. When he found me again, feeding my baby, behind that store, he didn't lecture me or judge me. He just took us home. She paused, wiping a tear. My father could have turned me in that first night. He could have walked away when he learned about my troubled past. He could have given up when those men took hope in me. Her voice grew stronger. But he never did. He fought for us. He searched for us. He risked his life to save us. Mariah turned fully toward Griffin now, tears streaming freely. "Dad, you showed me what real love looks like. You showed me what God's love looks like. Patient, enduring, forgiving. Thank you for never giving up on me." The church was silent except for scattered sniffles. Pastor Raina gestured for Griffin to join his daughter. He stood slowly, his own eyes glistening, and made his way to the stage. At the microphone, Griffin cleared his throat gruffly. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began, his deep voice rough with emotion. "But I need to say this. For 18 years, I carried the weight of my mistakes. I let fear and pride keep me from my daughter. I thought I was protecting her by staying away, but I was wrong." He turned to face the congregation. "Forgiveness isn't just about saying sorry. It's about changing. It's about choosing love over fear every single day. My daughter taught me that. My son taught me that. This church taught me that." Mariah stepped closer to her father, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "God gave me a second chance with my family," Griffin continued. "He brought my daughter back to me, gave me a beautiful granddaughter, and showed me that healing is possible even after years of pain." Pastor Raina stepped forward, her dark eyes shining. She embraced them both, holding them tight as the congregation spontaneously rose to their feet. The applause echoed off the high ceiling, punctuated by calls of "Amen" and "Praise God." As the clapping slowly died down, the worship team began a soft hymn. People started filing out of their pews, many coming forward to hug Mariah and Griffin. Sammy proudly showed off baby Hope to anyone who would look, telling them, "That's my sister and my niece." When the crowd finally thinned, Griffin found himself alone with Pastor Raina near the altar. She was straightening some hymnals, humming softly to herself. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, and Griffin felt his heart skip a beat. "Raina?" he said softly. She turned, her expression gentle and knowing. "I need to tell you something." He took a deep breath. "These past few months, you've been our rock. You've helped heal my family. But somewhere along the way, He faltered, then pressed on. "I developed feelings for you, strong ones." Raina's face softened into a warm smile. She reached out and took his hand, her touch sending warmth through his chest. "Let's take it slow," she said simply, squeezing his fingers. Griffin nodded, relief and joy flooding through him. They walked together toward the church entrance, where Sammy was waiting patiently. He held Hope's tiny hand as she sat in her carrier, making her wave at people passing by. "Ready to go home?" Griffin asked his son. Sammy nodded enthusiastically. "Hope likes church," he declared. She smiled during all the singing. The community college auditorium buzzed with excitement as families filed in, clutching bouquets and balloons. Griffin sat in the third row, his chest swelling with pride as he balanced Hope on his knee. The 6-month-old wore a tiny dress covered in yellow daisies, matching the spring weather outside. "Is Mariah coming out soon?" Sammy whispered, his fingers fidgeting with his shirt buttons. He'd insisted on wearing his best clothes for his sister's big day. "Any minute now, buddy." Griffin bounced Hope gently, watching her chubby hands reach for the program he held. The paper listed Mariah Rivera among the GED graduates, and just seeing her name in print made his eyes misty. The ceremony began with speeches, but Griffin barely heard them. His mind wandered to the past few months. The late-night study sessions at their kitchen table, Mariah determined to succeed despite her exhaustion, Hope sleeping nearby in her bouncer. The way Sammy would bring his sister hot chocolate and sit quietly beside her, working on his own homework. When Mariah's name was called, their whole row erupted in cheers. She walked across the stage in her blue graduation gown, her head held high. Griffin couldn't stop the tears now. Hope squealed at the sound of her mother's name, making several people around them laugh. "That's my girl," Griffin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's my baby girl." After the ceremony, they found Mariah clutching her diploma in the crowded lobby. She rushed toward them, careful not to trip on her gown. "I did it, Dad. I really did it." Griffin wrapped her in a tight hug, mindful of Hope between them. "I never doubted you for a second, sweetheart." The following week, Mariah started her new position at the church. Pastor Raina had created a role specifically for her, program assistant for the youth outreach ministry. Griffin watched his daughter flourish as she helped other young mothers find their footing, her own experiences becoming a bridge of understanding. One Wednesday evening, Griffin sat in on his first veterans mentoring session at the community center. The room was filled with young men and women, their eyes carrying the same shadows he once saw in his own mirror. He shared his story, the PTSD, the mistakes, the long road to healing, and watched understanding dawn in their faces. Sometimes the hardest battle, he told them, his voice steady, is finding your way back to family, but it's worth every step. After the session, a young veteran approached him, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Sir, how did you learn to be a dad again?" Griffin thought about Sammy's patience, Mariah's forgiveness, and Hope's unconditional love. "One day at a time, son. One day at a time." At home, life settled into new rhythms. Sammy's teacher called one afternoon, her voice excited. "Mr. Lee, I had to tell you about Sammy's essay. He wrote the most beautiful piece about heroism." That evening, Griffin found the essay on Sammy's desk. The title made his heart skip. "My hero is my dad." He sat on Sammy's bed and read, "My dad is my hero because he never gives up. When my sister was lost, he found her. When I'm scared, he makes me feel safe. He works 2 jobs sometimes, but he always has time to read me stories. He says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. My dad is the bravest person I know." Griffin carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his wallet, right next to the old photo of young Mariah. The moment that brought everything full circle happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. They were all in the living room, Griffin reading the newspaper, Mariah sorting laundry, Sammy playing with his dinosaurs on the carpet. Hope had been pulling herself up on the coffee table for weeks, Cruz walking along its edge with determined concentration. Suddenly, Mariah gasped. "Dad, look!" Hope had let go of the table. She stood wobbling for a moment, her face scrunched in concentration. Then, with tiny arms outstretched, she took one tentative step toward Griffin. Then another, and another. "That's it, baby girl." Griffin set down his paper and held out his arms. "Come to Grandpa." Hope's face lit up with a toothless grin as she toddled the remaining steps into Griffin's waiting embrace. The whole family erupted in cheers and applause. Sammy jumped up and down, clapping wildly. Mariah wiped happy tears from her eyes. "Did you see that?" She laughed. "She walked. My baby walked." Griffin scooped Hope up and kissed her chubby cheeks, just like her mama, strong and determined. Mariah sat beside them on the couch, leaning her head on Griffin's shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." Griffin looked around at his family, at Sammy demonstrating his best dinosaur walk to make Hope giggle, at Mariah's peaceful smile, at Hope's tiny fingers curled around his thumb. His heart felt so full it might burst. This was what healing looked like. This was what coming home felt like. The spring sunshine bathed the church lawn in golden warmth, its rays filtering through the canopy of newly leafed oak and maple trees. Dappled shadows danced across the emerald grass as a gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. Griffin knelt on the soft earth, carefully smoothing out the wrinkles in their red and white checkered blanket, the same one his late wife Sarah had bought years ago for family outings that had seemed impossible back then. Nearby, Sammy moved with deliberate precision, arranging paper, plates, and plastic utensils in perfect symmetrical rows. The 10-year-old's tongue poked out slightly from the corner of his mouth, a sure sign of deep concentration. His slender fingers adjusted each napkin with the careful attention of an architect designing a cathedral. "A little to the left, buddy," Griffin suggested gently, crouching down to Sammy's eye level. He'd learned to speak softly during these moments when his son's focus was so intense. "That looks perfect." Sammy nodded with grave seriousness, his sandy hair catching the sunlight as he made one final adjustment to a wayward fork. "Everything has to be just right, Dad. It's important." His voice carried that earnest quality that always tugged at Griffin's heartstrings. The sound of delighted giggling drew Griffin's attention across the sun-drenched lawn. Mariah sat cross-legged in the grass about 20 feet away, her dark hair flowing loose around her shoulders. She clapped her hands together, her face radiant with pure joy as she watched Hope take those precious, wobbling steps toward her waiting arms. "Come on, baby girl," Mariah called out, her voice bright with encouragement. "You can do it!" Hope's determined little face was a picture of concentration, her tiny brow furrowed as she navigated the uneven ground. Her yellow sundress, dotted with tiny white daisies, fluttered in the warm breeze, and her dark curls bounced with each unsteady stride. At 6 months, she was already showing signs of her mother's fierce independence. "Mama, Mama," Hope squealed, her face lighting up like sunrise as she stumbled the final few steps into Mariah's outstretched arms. "That's my brave girl." Mariah scooped her daughter up, spinning her around before pressing a shower of kisses to those chubby, rose-pink cheeks. Their shared laughter rang out across the peaceful church grounds, a sound that made Griffin's chest tighten with overwhelming gratitude. The crunch of footsteps on the gravel pathway made them all turn. Pastor Raina approached through the dappled sunlight, her flowing skirt swaying with each step. In her hands, she carried a covered ceramic dish that immediately caught Sammy's attention. "Is that your special flan?" Sammy asked, practically bouncing on his toes as his eyes widened with hopeful anticipation. "The one with the caramel sauce that tastes like heaven?" Raina's warm, melodious laugh filled the air as she set the dessert down carefully on the corner of their blanket. "Of course it is, mi amor. I wouldn't dare show up to our family picnic without it." Her dark eyes twinkled with affection as she looked down at the boy who had so thoroughly captured her heart. Griffin rose to his feet, brushing grass from his knees as he moved to help her with the wicker basket slung over her shoulder. Their hands brushed as he took her purse, a touch that was brief but electric, carrying the weight of months of slowly building trust, friendship, and something deeper that neither of them rushed to name. Raina's gentle smile, soft and knowing, told him she felt the same quiet stirring in her heart. "Here, let me help you set up," Raina offered, already reaching toward the stack of cups Sammy had arranged. "No," Sammy said quickly, then caught himself and softened his tone. "I mean, thank you, Pastor Raina, but I've got it all organized, just how it needs to be. Everything has its special place." He gestured proudly at his careful arrangements, his chest puffed up with the importance of his task. "He's been working on the setup for 20 minutes, Griffin added with an affectionate wink toward Raina. "I think he could teach Martha Stewart a thing or two about table presentation." Hope, who had been watching this exchange with the intense curiosity that marked everything she did, suddenly toddled over to investigate the newcomer. Her little arms reached up toward Raina, her face bright with the fearless trust of childhood. "Raina, up, up!" Hope demanded, her voice carrying that imperious tone that only toddlers could manage. "Mi Angelita Linda," Raina cooed in her native Spanish, her voice soft as velvet as she lifted the baby and settled her comfortably on her hip. Hope immediately became fascinated with the delicate silver cross pendant that hung from Raina's neck, her tiny fingers exploring its smooth surface while she babbled contentedly. As the afternoon deepened around them, they gathered in a loose circle around Sammy's perfectly arranged blanket. The boy finally declared the setup complete with a satisfied nod, stepping back to admire his handiwork like an artist unveiling a masterpiece. Griffin cleared his throat gently, and they all joined hands, even little Hope managing to grasp one finger each from Griffin and Raina. His deep voice carried across the peaceful lawn as he offered thanks, the words flowing more easily than they had in years. After months of healing, of learning to trust again, of rebuilding broken relationships, brick by careful brick, gratitude came as naturally as breathing. "Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day, for the food we're about to share, and most of all, for bringing this family together. Bless our time and help us to always remember your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, the others echoed softly. Who's ready for some of the best fried chicken in the county? Mariah asked with a grin, opening the wicker basket she'd packed with such care that morning. Cooking had become one of her greatest joys since starting her job, coordinating the church's Young Mothers program, and she took special pride in creating meals that brought people together around the table. As they began to eat, conversation flowed as naturally as the warm spring breeze. Sammy launched into an elaborate story about his latest dinosaur drawings, complete with sound effects and dramatic gestures that had Hope clapping with delight. Meanwhile, the little girl methodically demolished a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, managing to get more strawberry jam on her cheeks and chin than actually in her mouth. Raina listened to Sammy's stories with the same rapt attention she gave her Sunday sermons, asking thoughtful questions that made the boy beam with pride. Griffin found himself marveling at how seamlessly she had woven herself into the fabric of their healing family. "Tag! Tag!" Hope suddenly announced, pushing herself up on her sturdy little legs with the determination of someone on an important mission. "You want to play tag, Hope?" Sammy asked, his face lighting up like Christmas morning. When she nodded enthusiastically, bouncing on her toes, he scrambled to his feet. "Okay, but I'll go real slow so you can catch me." And so began their game, with Hope's delighted squeals and giggles filling the warm afternoon air. She chased after her big brother across the soft grass, her little legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. Sammy ran just fast enough to stay ahead, his natural gentleness shining through as he occasionally let her get close before dancing away with a playful, "Can't catch me, little sister." Griffin watched them play, his throat growing tight with an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. He remembered those long, lonely nights when it had been just him and Sammy in their small apartment, both of them aching for something more, but not knowing how to find it. The silence had been so heavy sometimes, broken only by Sammy's quiet questions about why they didn't have a bigger family like the other kids at church. Now, here they were, whole, healing, surrounded by more love than Griffin had ever dared to dream possible. Raina's hand found his on the soft fabric of the blanket, her touch grounding him in this perfect moment. Her fingers, warm and steady, intertwined with his as she spoke softly. "God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" "That he does," Griffin agreed, his voice rough with emotion as he thought of all the twists and turns, the pain and fear and moments of black despair that had somehow led them to this sun-drenched afternoon. "I never could have imagined this a year ago." Mariah, who had been watching her daughter play with eyes that shone with unshed tears, shifted closer to them on the blanket. She'd traveled such a long, difficult road from that desperate young woman stealing baby formula in the dead of night, her heart breaking with each choice she felt forced to make. The church's Young Mothers program was thriving under her passionate leadership now. Her own story of redemption, inspiring other women to believe in the possibility of second chances. As the afternoon light began to soften and deepen, painting everything in shades of honey and gold, Hope finally tired herself out from all the running and giggling. She toddled over to where Sammy sat, catching his breath, and climbed into his lap with the casual confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved. "Look, Hope," Sammy said softly, pointing up at the sky where white clouds drifted lazily overhead. "That one looks like a elephant, and that one looks like a birthday cake." Hope followed his pointing finger with serious concentration, babbling her own observations in the special language only she understood. Raina began gathering the remains of their picnic lunch, humming an old hymn under her breath, something about amazing grace that seemed to float on the warm air like a blessing. Her movements were unhurried, savoring these precious moments of peace and togetherness. Griffin leaned back against the sturdy trunk of the ancient dogwood tree behind them, its branches heavy with white blooms that created a living canopy overhead. The tree had weathered countless seasons, countless storms, and yet each spring it burst forth with new life and beauty. Much like their little family, he thought with wonder. Mariah rose from her spot on the blanket and moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his in a gesture of connection that still amazed him after all these months. The wall that had stood between them for so many years had finally crumbled, replaced by something stronger and more beautiful than either of them had thought possible. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with all the emotions that words could barely contain, "for not giving up on us, for fighting for this." Griffin felt tears blur his vision, and for once, he didn't try to hide them or brush them away. No, baby girl, thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for giving this old man a chance to be the father you deserved all along. They sat together in comfortable silence under the blooming dogwood, Griffin and Mariah. Sammy and baby Hope, their faces warmed by the golden light of the setting sun. They were safe here, surrounded by love and acceptance and the kind of grace that could heal even the deepest wounds. A family bound not just by blood, but by choice and faith and forgiveness freely given. Hope, growing drowsy in the peaceful afternoon warmth, crawled from Sammy's lap into Griffin's arms. Her small hand patted his weathered cheek as she yawned, her eyelashes fluttering against her rosy skin. Sammy leaned against Mariah's shoulder, his body relaxed and content in a way that spoke of deep security and belonging. Above them, the dogwood petals began to drift down like nature's own confetti, white and perfect against the blue sky. They fell softly around the family, gathered beneath the ancient tree, a gentle reminder of grace, freely given and gratefully received, of new beginnings that could bloom even from the most broken soil. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Griffin Lee, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.